Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Ancient Ways for Modern Days. Today we are going to jump right into Acts chapter 14, and I'll just go ahead and read the text that we're going to look at. And as I read it, what I want us to be thinking about is the fickleness of mankind and really the underlying desire we have to worship. The reality that we are created to worship, but how fickle we can be in the object of our worship. And so today's Ancient Ways for Modern Days is really maybe a chance to check our own hearts and how we're worshiping and even the way we think about the worship we give to God. And so let's take a look at this. Acts chapter 14, starting in verse 8. It says, "Now at Lystra there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked." So this is Paul on his missionary journey, and he sees this man. It says, "He listened to Paul speaking, and Paul looked intently at him, and seeing that he had faith to be made well, he said in a loud voice, 'Stand upright on your feet.' And he sprang up and began walking. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, 'The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men.' Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowds, crying out, 'Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. In past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways, yet he did not leave himself without witnesses, for he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness.' Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the people from offering sacrifice to them." Well, we'll stop right there, actually. There's a handful of things that happen in this text. You see this moment where Paul looks at this man and sees that the man has faith to be made well. What do we do with a text like that? Well, what we understand is Paul has this spiritual gifting of healing that is meant to authenticate the apostolic teaching, the new revelation of the Word of God. And so these two things, as the new revelation of the Word of God was being revealed, they went hand in hand. It's no longer the case today. Those who want to claim to have new revelation should be able to perform miracles like Paul did. And typically today in our world, what we see is kind of a shystering performance of miracles, emotional experiences that have little Word of God behind them and have little significance and physical healing or change that accompany it. But that's not really what I want to focus on here. What I want to focus on is Paul, in fact, he heals this man, and the crowd's response, their reaction, they think that their pagan gods have come down and are walking among them. And look at the heart of mankind in this moment, how quick they are to worship something greater than themselves and to give honor and desire to take Paul and Barnabas and worship them as Hermes and Zeus. And this is the reality all of us live with. We do it in different ways today. We want to worship sports teams or athletes. We want to worship politicians or movie stars. We want to worship people in our sphere of work that are excelling, and we want to be like them, and we idolize them. But our hearts, they tend to have this longing for something greater than us that we can give our affection and our love to. Why do we have this? Well, because we're created with this desire to worship the one true God, the only one who truly is greater than us, who deserves our affection and our allegiance. And so this is the response of these people in this paganistic fashion, but we have the same response in our world today. We have this desire to love and to worship and honor that which is greater than us. Oftentimes it's misplaced and it's misdirected. And so you see Paul and Barnabas, you see their response when this worship is misplaced and misdirected. When people are worshiping them, they're like, guys, what are you doing? We are men just like you. We are messengers, and we have come to give you the message of the one true gospel. The message of Jesus and his death and resurrection. And then there's this interesting line in here. Verse 16, in the past generations, he allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. Yet he did not leave himself without witness, for he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. Paul is drawing the connection for these people that God throughout time has shown himself. He has given witness in things like the seasons, in things like the ability for people to produce crop and be fed and have good, glad hearts. This goes back to the Romans 1 passage we recently spoke about, how God has made his existence known to all, but all have chosen to walk in ignorance and ignore him without gratitude. What this does is it emphasizes the reality that God has made himself known. He has given us a desire to worship, and we must now rightly worship God. We must now give our affection to the one true God and give our allegiance to the one true God. This is the ancient way for our modern day. Yes, the life that we live is different than the life of those with a pagan worldview 2,000 years ago, but the heart desire to worship is just the same, and the temptation to misdirect it is just the same. Where do you find your satisfaction and your hope? Where do you find the most joy in life? What do you look for, or where do you look to for your security and for your joy? This is where our attention should be rightly aimed at Christ. We should look to Christ for our security and our hope, for our joy and for our peace and for our love. We should set our attention on the crucified and risen Jesus. We must be careful. We must be careful to guard our worship. Let's apply this to those things that we mentioned earlier. Is your hope in the politics of our day? I'm not saying you shouldn't wisely and biblically look at the issues, look at the politicians, look at the platforms, look at the parties. You and I, we should be very wise in the way we go and we vote. And we should vote in line with biblical principles, without a doubt. And there are some clear biblical principles we must in earnest consider. But is that where our affection and our worship goes? Are our hearts aimed at a political party and what they might bring to the table for our hope and our security? We might be worshiping a man or a party or a platform. What about entertainment? Do you just live and die for a sport or for a sport team? Do you live and die based on an athlete and their success? Do you live vicariously most of your life through what you watch on the television or the games you go to and the entertainment that you're absorbing? Let me warn you, you are dangerously close to idolatry, if not having crossed into it. Should you enjoy sports? Yeah, enjoy them, watch them, follow them. That's we're not saying cut it out completely, but here's what we're saying. Be careful. Be careful. Are you starstruck by an entertainer? Maybe an athlete or maybe an actor or an actress. Are you starstruck by someone successful in your place of employment or in your sphere of expertise? Are you just hoping for interaction with certain people? Be careful. I know you're not saying Zeus and Hermes has come down, but do you treat that person as if they're something even more than a human at times, maybe without even verbalizing that, or even really without realizing that's the way you're thinking? Be careful. Be careful. Worship God alone. Trust in God for your hope and your security and your peace and your satisfaction. This is the ancient way for our modern day. It's a moment where we learn to guard our hearts. We guard our hearts from the idolatry that is so easy to fall into. And then lastly, learn from Paul and Barnabas. Maybe you're in a spot where people really appreciate you and they really value you and they really admire you and they really respect you. Be careful to always point them to worship God. Make sure you're watching over those who admire you, and make sure that their hearts don't seem to be aimed inappropriately at their appreciation of you. You are entrusted with their affection. Ultimately, aim that affection and that allegiance at the one true God.